Welcome back to Brave Ideas. I'm your host, Caleb Parker, and this season was recorded live in New York City at GCUC's 50th edition. For years, office real estate was primarily a leasing business. Find the tenant, sign the lease, collect the rent. But today, that model is being challenged. Customers have more choice, leases are becoming shorter, retention matters more than ever, and landlords are increasingly being forced to think like operators. So the question becomes, how well do you actually understand your customers? Not just the company signing the lease, but the people inside the building using the space every single day. My guest for this episode is Brandon Medeiros, CEO of ReKalibrate. Brandon works at the intersection of technology, customer intelligence, workplace data, and commercial real estate. He's been helping landlords think differently about engagement, retention, and what it means to operate buildings in a world where customer experience is becoming a competitive advantage. In our conversation, we explore why office is becoming an operating business rather than a leasing business, why customer intelligence may become more valuable than building intelligence, how landlords should think about retention in a changing market, the role AI could play in commercial real estate, and where operators should focus if they're just beginning their operational real estate journey. If you're a landlord, investor, operator, or anyone thinking about the future of office, I think you'll get a lot out of this episode. So let's kick off this episode with Brandon. Welcome to Brave Ideas, Brandon.
It's good to be here, Caleb.
It is great to be here at J Suites in Manhattan for Juicy's 50th. Shout out to Liz for teaming up with us for the Brave Ideas Juicy episode here. So Brandon, office is no longer a leasing business. We've discussed this. It's becoming an operating business. You've been talking about tenant level intelligence. I like to say customer intelligence, but you talk about engagement and while retention matters far more than it ever has. And we're going to get into that discussion today. So as we are moving into operational real estate, you've said that it's become one of the most complex environments for landlords than it's ever has been before. What makes this moment so difficult right now or different than it used to be?
I mean, we came out of COVID, obviously, actually we came out of the late 2010s in a pretty simple interest rate environment, which was number kind of one big driver to it, with a lot of demand for investment in office. Office is probably one of the largest sectors when it comes to capital placement of commercial real estate, which is in itself a massive investment vehicle, right? So we came out of the 2010s feeling pretty good about ourselves and our industry. And then we hit COVID. COVID brought some serious questions, obviously, to how we think about the use and purpose of office, right? As we came out of COVID, we saw return to office in some formats, but certainly it became uneven, and we're still dealing with a lot of experimentation from tenants who still have not really figured out how they're going to occupy space anymore. So that was a huge blow that we're still kind of figuring out and dealing with. The interest rate environment got way more complex. The interest from institutional investors has become more complex too, because office looks certainly less desirable than it's looked in the past. And I think the big one too is now we're sitting down the barrel of how AI is going to impact jobs, right? And we don't know, right? Mythos could be the greatest thing that's ever happened to humanity. That's the new Claude model, or it could be more overhype than we've seen before. But we can't say without doubt that AI has not impacted the jobs market. And when the jobs market impacted, the way we need and use commercial real estate is impacted. The way that we need and use commercial real estate has been impacted by COVID still, with great experimentation. And so we're sitting in 2026 in what is becoming a more healthy office market. We're certainly seeing more leasing across the US. I think we had the best year of leasing since 2020 and 2025,
Thankfully,
which is good, right? But we still have markets that are sitting around 25% general vacancy, right? And so we're sitting here in New York, and New York is one of the best markets, and it's been one of the most resilient. We have seen people back to the office. We've seen higher rents again, and yet Chelsea and downtown and Flatiron and Midtown South still haven't recovered, right? And so it's been uneven, and it's a difficult investment class right now, and those challenges don't seem like they're going away anytime soon.
You hear that word bifurcation. You've got the great stories of the leasing activity and the flight to quality and the best assets performing very well. Yet at the same time, we have buildings that are selling at 90% of the previous value. It's becoming a really interesting market right now. What that leads to those, it becomes more unpredictable. The dealing with office real estate specifically is becoming more operational,
Yeah.
more dynamic. And so when you talk about this quote tenant level intelligence, what exactly does that mean for you? And why is building level reporting no longer good enough?
Yeah, I think a big part of what we think about all the time is it seems to us that commercial real estate went from like a lease management business. I manage a lease, I lease to the next guy, I manage the next lease, right? I have a predictable function, right? The market has pinned itself in every underwriting that's ever been done in like recent history. Every underwriting model assumes that 70% of tenants renew in place, right? It's a really big one to think about. Why do we hold that number? Because if we don't hold that number, that means that we're underwriting for a tenant who's going to go vacant. When they go vacant, we have months of downtime before we get our next tenant. We have to pay huge TI, tenant improvement allowances, huge leasing commissions, tons of free rent, right? And so we've pinned ourselves into that model and we said, hey, that's the numbers that make our underwriting work, right? Fast forward to 2026, retention rates are all over the place. You could renew a tenant, tenant could say they're going to renew with you, tenant could leave, right? Tenant could be an occupancy in a building. We had 2 publishers across 2 of our buildings that have been in those buildings for 25 years. Post-COVID, gone. 0% occupancy. Those tenants are both leaving. Publishing industry doesn't need office space nearly as much as it did. Were our underwriting models right? No, they weren't, right? And so when we talk about tenant level data, what we want to try to understand is how can we put ourselves into the shoes of a tenant to try to understand the things that they're going through, right? So if you're sitting over at Willis Towers Watson or Facebook or Meta or Google or Microsoft, doesn't matter. Each one of these real estate teams is looking at their own data across their portfolio and they're saying, where are my needs right now? How am I utilizing this premises? What space, what square footage will I need at the end of term, right? Is this supporting the needs of my business today? Is this the right building that I should be in, right? And so when we ask ourselves the question, what is tenant level data? Tenant level data is the data that our tenants use, right? When we put ourselves into the shoes of our owners, what we want them to be able to do is function as if they are a best-in-class workplace strategy team who knows as much about that tenant as that tenant knows about themselves. And so what we try to do is we try to lever the existing toolkits that we have in our buildings to unlock that. And that could be things like our occupancy systems. It can be things like our tenant experience apps. It can be things like our reservations platform. It can be our parking components. It can be our Wi-Fi data that we use and we use religiously, right? And so what we try to do for it is form the data up in a way that we can then say, look, we understand you, right? We understand what you're going through. We understand that we sold you space for 150,000 square feet, but we only think you're going to need 50, 60 at the end of your term, but we want to retain you, right? We've built this program up around you and it's supporting the needs of your clients. So I'm going to explain how it's supporting your needs, right? We've done a great job on your amenities program. And what we want to avoid at the end of the lease is we want to avoid construction risk, right? We want to rebuild your space where you're going to need it. We want to make sure you can move you into it seamlessly so that we can win your deal at the end. That tenant's not technically renewing in place, right? They went from 150,000 square feet to 60,000 square feet. But what did we have an opportunity to do? We retained them.
So earlier you said that the tenants, the customers, they already have this data and they're using their own data to inform their decisions. And what you're saying is the landlord needs to have access to that same data, which is where you've come in
Yeah.
to help surface that data for the landlord.
It's a bit over the top maybe to say that every tenant in the world has access to that data. I think they try to, right? But I think what you find is that there is some, and like Phil Kirshner is going to be bouncing around here later. Interesting talk, I'm sure that he'll give.
Stay tuned for his episode later in the season.
There you go. You'd be surprised. You'll find some really advanced workplace strategy teams and companies, and then you'll find some, it's nowhere near as sophisticated, right? And so kind of when you move out of like the majors into the mid markets, they don't have access to this data nearly as much, right? They make their decisions on anecdotes. They try to surface it later, right? But yeah, for the most part, buildings have access to this type of stuff and they can provide these services.
If we all agree that real estate's moving from a white box product to a service, which we've been covering this podcast for years now, then it makes sense that a landlord having the data to be able to have intelligent conversations with that customer, serve them better by getting ahead of their needs.
Yeah.
But if they've underwritten that customer's lease for 10 years and you're 3 years into this or 4 years in, and all of a sudden you're like, actually, this is not working, is the landlord really going to go to that customer and shrink their footprint?
In markets like Chicago or buildings where you're experiencing like 70, 80% occupancy and you're struggling because the markets are struggling? The answer is no, of course not, right? But in markets like Miami or Phoenix, right, where these markets are on a tear, right, and there is an opportunity to increase your rent roll, we have negotiated deals with tenants who are not using space. Why? Because there's a tenant spending $80 a foot, and we know the market, we know our rents are 120 a foot. Well, we can go to that tenant proactively and say, "Hey, I got a tenant who's willing to pay me 120, right? You guys want to buy out of your lease? I'll give you a sweetheart deal, right? Might just take your security deposit, discount your rent way down, bring your new tenant into place, and then have 3, 4 months of downtime as we do construction for the next tenant, right?" So I point this out to say it's not as if every building in the US is bad. There are different propositions, right? There's the tightness and replacing your rent roll. And then on the downside protection, there's the knowledge that we can underwrite this appropriately. We might not let them go in 4 years, right, with 4 years left in their lease, but we could start planning for what that's going to look like.
So if I'm a landlord listening to this right now, and I'm already paying attention to my occupancy, my rent roll,
Yep.
the lease events that will come up in the future, I think I've got a good feel of what the business plan is going to look like over the next 4, 5, 10 years. What is the biggest blind spot that I'm missing right now?
There is no one under the sun who has a good idea of what what the business plan is going to look like for the next 4, 5, 7, 10 years, right? There's just too many changes that are going on. There's just still too much uncertainty and confusion between how tenants are performing, right? That you can never really feel as if you've got a strong enough handle on it. You can try your best. That's all we can do today, if that makes sense.
Does that then change the way we think about investing in real estate?
It does. I mean, there's big questions in there, right? Like why we talk about retention and not renewal so much is renewal for us is such a function of just what the business needs, someone's business needs are, right? If it goes up, they need more space. If it goes down, they need less space, right? The idea that commercial real estate was stable because it generally followed the jobs market was like why we believe those numbers to be true. And now it doesn't. Volatility continues to persist. So renewal probability or renewal in place isn't really something we can control, right? What we can control is retention. If you need more, if you need less, if you need a completely different format of space, I can provide that to you and I can make sure you never walk out the door, right? I'm still going to pay TIs. I'm still going to pay free rents. I might think about different ways to build and construct environments. I might be willing to do shorter form deals, right? I might be willing to blend and extend. I might be willing to do a lot of different things, right? But I want to retain you because in commercial real estate in 2026, if I don't retain you, it could be 18 to 24 months
Huge.
before I find another tenant.
It's a huge void cost.
Huge costs.
And the new acquisition of customers is expensive as well.
So to your question of like, how do we think about operating real estate differently? We start thinking about driving that retention number and being able to cater to whatever the business requirements is at the end of a lease and sometimes ahead of that needle, right? No one's ever going to bat an eyelash for some tenant saying, well, I need more space in year 3, right? But you will if you can't figure out where you're supposed to put them in your building.
Mhm.
If you can't figure out your adjacencies and you say, hey, I have 4 buildings, you're in this building, the closest I can give you is a quarter mile down the way, that tenant's going to go, it sucks. This isn't great, right?
It feels like this is like a major shift in how landlords and investors look at value protection. How do you protect the value of the building? How do you create more value for that building? It's completely changing things up. How do you think amenities and hospitality and the operational real estate aspect of engaging customers that are in the building, are we, as we move into these operational extras that affects this retention, what is that going to do for the asset performance?
Yeah. I think since we talked 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
I actually finished up a big data project with one of our clients, Tourmaline Capital Partners, and we'll be producing that case study with them probably tail end of this week, early next, right? And I'll talk about that in a sec, but like
We'll have to put a link to that case study.
as soon as it
in the
comes out,
podcast,
we
yeah.
will attach it, right? But I think when we talked about amenities were one of those knee-jerk things that we just started to do. We've had amenities in buildings for a long time, and it's like not totally new, but usually it was like a pretty crappy fitness center somewhere tucked into the bottom of a building, or a conference center that was like a couple of chairs thrown in with maybe AV associated with it. Following after COVID, those things just went on steroids, right? We started building bigger centers, bigger conference centers. We started experimenting with pieces. You got Vornado experimenting at One Penn Plaza. If you're in New York, I think Annie, one of my favorite New York jobs, right? They partnered with Episcope Hospitality. They opened up One Penn. There's a great public plaza in there now. They partnered with Industrious. They did a lot of things really right. And then you have One Penn on a tear. That used to be like some of the worst, dumpiest real estate in New York. It was attached to Penn Station. Now they're at 90-something% occupancy and their rents are highest than they've ever been. None of those buildings would be considered Class A plus, right? You're not talking about a new tower that's gone up. So in New York, great example, fantastic example. But it meant that they didn't just build amenities. They made the concept of a premium product so core to what they thought about, right? They put great operators into place. They understood what they were trying to accomplish. They built engaging spaces, right? All too commonly, buildings will just build the conference center and manage the construction project and say, well, it's built. I put it in a place. I'm done, right? It's so much more than that today. A premium product requires you to turn your asset management ethos into, I'm going to actually think about the way that I program buildings, the way that I engage. And so coming to this TCP study, we call one of those metrics engagement. And engagement for us is a measure of the percentage of employees who have engaged with our amenities in the last year, right? Generally speaking, across our fleet, we see a 12%. 12% of employees engage with amenities. Most of those are pretty fitness-based, right? With TCP, Tourmaline Capital Partners, we see a 35% engagement rate, right? They have made it a part of what they do.
Is that good? 35%?
35% is like some of the highest that we've seen so far. We're just now figuring out what good looks
But
like.
it's interesting you say that's good because if you think about, that means 65% are not engaging with the
Still
amenities.
opportunities.
And when you think about the putting amenities to a service charge and billing that back to a customer versus if you were to have it on some sort of, if you're monetizing it through a profit center, whether that's a lease, a management agreement, or whatever it be, if you've got only 35% engagement, is that enough to sustain a business?
Seems like it's enough because as we look at we don't run Vornado, so I can't tell you what their numbers are, but when it comes to TCP, the 35% engagement rate that they've seen across their big three assets has generated a 30% rent premium over their peers, has kept their buildings 15-20% lower in higher in occupancy than their peers, lower in vacancy than their peers. When a space goes dark, they replace their tenants within 7 to 8 months, not 18 months, right? When it comes to the retention rates for a lot of these buildings, now one of the buildings' retention rates is 0% because they're pulling tenants up from $80 a square foot to $120 a square foot. I don't care what program you have.
No, they're trying to churn those customers anyways.
Few tenants are going to go, oh yeah, totally.
But there's more in the market that's going to pay.
And they've replaced them, right? When it comes to the other buildings, there's one of the buildings sitting at 100% retention rate of their old tenants, right?
And the point being is that the building is appealing.
It's appealing.
It's appealing to people. People want to be there because of the amenities that are in the building.
And then to your point, saying that 1/3 is not enough, could we do better? I'm sure we can, right? I'm sure there's opportunities for us to go over 1/3. But when you're talking about 1/3 of people in the building have recognized that the space that they go to, which is so normal for office, my office is on the 16th floor. I go into my elevator and I go up to the 16th floor, right? That's what I do. And that's what happens in most buildings. Again, our engagement rate against the rest of the fleet is 12%, right? These guys are sitting at 35%. When you think that one in three people are aware that there's a gym, there's a fitness center, engaging with it and doing so regularly, I would say that's pretty good for where we're coming from in office, which was 0 prior to COVID, or numbers that were so close to 0 as to be irrelevant, right? And so when I look at these guys on the metrics that matter and the things that they're doing versus their peers, they have demonstrated that they have a premium product, right? And that's a compelling story.
Well, you talk about Penn Plaza. I mean, that huge screen, that massive screen in there. I imagine office attendance is up during the playoffs of baseball, basketball, football, hockey. For those who like sports, the Olympics, you got to match the screen. Now, I'm not advocating every building needs to have a 1,000-foot wide screen. That in itself is a big tick box, I think.
I would just say though, we've done this math inside out, front and reverse. We've yet to see a relationship between increased engagement driving increased attendance. It seems to be the other way around, right?
Say that again.
So we haven't seen like, okay, if I engage with an employee, do they come to the office more frequently? The answer is no, they don't, right? But it's true in reverse that those who engage attend the office more, right? But it's not because they're engaged that drove them back to the office. It's that our engagements are better at people who attend the office more frequently, right? We are and should be designing our amenities to the people who use the office. We should not be designing it to try to get that one person who doesn't want to come to the office to come back to the office. We have yet to prove or seen it be true that happens.
I think that in itself is like a mic drop moment, because so many people in our industry have been trying to get people back into the office and trying to design for that. And you're making the point, well, actually, let those people, don't worry about those people, focus on the ones that want to be there, because there's a lot of those people too.
Do you design airports for people who are afraid of planes? Like, no, if I'm afraid to fly, I don't go out of my way to design an airport to be like, I'm so sorry that you're claustrophobic and don't like planes. Let me think about how to design air travel different, right? No, you design air travel for the people who travel, right? That's why you have your your medallion status, your United status. We give more benefit to the people who travel frequently with us, right? Office buildings should be gearing ourselves up so that we can, for the people who come to the office, we can make their workday the most impactful workday that they have, right?
It's refreshing to hear, because the whole debate that we've witnessed the past 5-6 years around the RTO, work from home, it's really, put that aside. Let's just focus on the people that want to be there. And you don't hear, Amtrak employees fighting with Delta on LinkedIn, right?
You do
Just,
not know.
I mean, people take trains, people take planes.
Yep.
You mentioned Annie earlier. We do have an audience here. Annie Rinker's in the audience, and we've got Ben Wright, both former alumni of this podcast. But I want to give them a shout out here. I think one thing I also want to point out is, Annie's also a client of yours.
Yep.
And so hopefully everything you're saying here, she's giving you a thumbs up on.
She is. Yep.
There we go. Thumbs up for those listening.
Hey, everybody. I'm breaking into the podcast. My name is Liz Elam. I'm the founder of Juicy. And I wanted to break in and let you know that there's other ways to be connected to Juicy. So you can join Juicy membership if you go to juicy.co, which is gcuc.co. On membership, you can find a really great deal right now. We're running a summer series. And in July, we're in the middle of it. And our second speaker is going to be on at the end of July. So definitely look at joining membership, which is also a great way to get discounts to Juicy events in live, in person, in real life, which is where we all want to be right now, is in real life. That is the future. In September, we're going to be in beautiful Cape Town, Africa, doing Juicy Africa for the first time. Antoinette is working really hard on that event. Head over to africa.juicy.co for more information and to get your tickets. Then in October, we're back in London, which is always such a great event. London is such an amazing city. It's so vibrant. The scene is incredible. You should definitely consider attending. You can get information there on uk.juicy.co. Emily is working her tail off, and it's going to be epic as always. And if that wasn't enough, we recently announced that Juicy USA 2027 is in one of my favorite cities in America, the vibrant, the amazing Miami. Early birds are up. They're never going to be this cheap again. So also look at juicy.co for a link to Miami early bird tickets. That's the only place you'll find those tickets. Anyway, we're over here busy thinking of new and exciting ways to educate you guys and inspire you guys. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. We had such a great time at Juicy's 50th with Caleb and Brave, and now I'm going to turn you back to it.
I want to get really deep and practical for a second. So we've been talking some really good notional things here. Is there an example or examples of maybe specific amenity interventions into a building, rather than just making the building more marketable and sound appealing, it actually has a tangible effect on that engagement you were talking about for the people that are coming in already? What's a specific example that you can talk about?
I think I'll put that in into practical terms, right? I think what we see about fitness centers is we see fitness center engagement rates peak around 12 to 15%, right? So you can never say, oh my God, I'm going to put a killer fitness center in and somehow address everybody. You just don't, right? Like you get 12 to 15% of the building population uses your gym. Why? Because they're athletes, because they like to work out, they make it a part of their routine. Those are great gyms. People show up 1, 2 days. We have something called touch points per attendance, how many times they show up. Usually people who are super embedded in the gym is a little bit over a day per attendance, right? So they hit the gym at least 1 day a week, right? 1 day when they show up. And so if we say like, oh, are we going to design a killer fitness center? Just know that you're designing it for a proportion of your building, right? And you're going to design a different style in Miami, who is way cooler and way more in shape than we are up in Chicago and Boston, right? So just be aware of it. Know that you're going to build a fitness center. You should size it appropriately to expect to hit that proportion of a population, right? And then you should think about diversification, right? Like all too frequently, we overbuild these massive conference rooms because we think everybody is going to need these giant training rooms. And certainly it's true in larger buildings that are formatted for law firms, you are going to need those. But I'll tell you what, you're not going to need them now when your leases haven't rolled yet, because those tenants also have large conference rooms. So we just built a large conference room for 100 people in a building that has 7 other large conference rooms. Why did we build that? Like, to what point, right? If we built it saying, hey, in the years coming, we're going to roll off these tenants because they don't want to carry it anymore, it's a great idea, right? But if you just built it because it's what the guy next to you built, it's redundant.
Imagine you're going to have those conversations with the customer in the retention phase to try to get them to renew and say, oh, we can shrink your footprint by taking on and making this a common space.
It's like the most requested thing of large law firms, right? Who carried a whole floor for a conference room facility and are just saying, I don't need it anymore. I didn't really want it. Can I have a shared facility, right? We saw the same thing with cafes in like single tenant buildings when like Meta or Facebook or Meta or Google said, hey, I have a giant cafe. I used to need 400,000 square feet and I ran it. The first thing that we saw after was, hey, I want to give this back. Can you run it? I still want it because we're sitting somewhere in Palo Alto that doesn't have it.
Where does the data layer feed into this conversation?
Data layer feeds into what are the tenants in my building want, right? How have they built their space? What is the most likely things and things that they've used and want to give up as their footprints change? When do I need to build those things in order to cater to the value from my tenants? And that last one's the biggest one, right? If you're going to approach a building that has 90% occupancy and 7 years of leasing, the size of amenities you should build today is 0. because you don't need any. There's not going to be any value extraction till year 4, right?
Yeah.
And so we say, okay, what are we going to need in year 7, right? How long is it going to take for us to build a true program in which we can get people to engage? Because it's not an overnight problem. You need to get people to understand the app. You need to get people to feel confident in going to use it. You need a ton of onboarding. So that takes some time. Then we need to build the thing. So we're back to year 4 now. And then in year 4, we have to predict what we're going to need in year 7.
But we have AI for that now, right?
I love AI. It does some really cool things. It will do better things, but the problem with AI in our industry is just a series of unstructured data sets that are confusing to say the least, right? We have data systems which exist. Even the most sophisticated of our clients, like Brookfield or Tishman, have great data piles, right? They've got Databricks or Cherry or whatever. You still put AI on that stuff. It cannot tell you what the rent roll is, right? It can't tell you where your tenants are. It can't reproduce a rent roll because it's still building itself up on very uncertain data sets, right? We as an industry can't really distinguish between what gross rent means in San Francisco versus Chicago.
And break that down for me. And for those of us who aren't deep into the data and AI conversation, you're talking about the data sets need to be organized in a way that the AI can understand it.
Yeah. So I'll give
you now, people can't even understand it.
I'll give you a great example of what AI is pretty good at, right? AI has been demonstrated to be pretty good at RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. So if you put a lease into ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, it would do a pretty good job of you saying like, okay, well, when's the lease commencement? And it'll go, lease commencement is June 1st, 2026, right? Hey, what's the proportionate share that these guys have of building expenses? It's 3.74%, right? It's a fantastic job, right? It can do it. It still gets confused from time to time. If you said, hey, look at all my leases and sum up all my parking, you're probably not going to trust it. Even if you say, hey, I've given you all my leases, tell me how many active leases I have. It's going to go, What do you mean by active? Like, because it can't really interpret between saying, I've looked at all the leases, I've looked at the lease commencement date, I know today is today. How many leases are between my lease commencement date and my expiration date? It's going to get real foggy on that real quick, right? So the basics, what's in the lease? Fine. Looking across leases, asking dynamic questions, very difficult. The data's not structured in a way that an LLM can say, I understood the context of the question super well. I understand the semantics and the meaning of the data super well. I understand what it is you're asking me. Let me give you an answer. Struggles quite a bit without a more complicated, what we refer to as like a semantic layer in the middle.
So Brandon, to sort of recap before I ask this next question, we've been talking about retention. We've been talking about having good data on each user in the building as a means to help understand what customers need and be able to serve that customer better so we can retain them. But there's an issue with structural data, and so we can't get AI just to come in and read it because we got to get our data good. So if we're starting from scratch today, a landlord's listening right now, they want to become more retention-led in the way they operate. We're moving into operational real estate. Where do they start first?
Right, where are we starting from real scratch here?
Yeah, what like you're having your first conversation with a potential client. Where are you starting?
I would say that to build up the products that people are going to want to see, we have to think about 3 legs of a customer experience triangle, right? Which is like, I have to put into place good technology that people can use, that they can access, and does what I want it to do. We were just on that bent. We were just having a conversation yesterday around like with a client up in Boston who was talking about tenant experience apps, and they were like, well, we're talking to the tenant experience apps and we want to make sure they're AI ready. And I said, well, look, what are you talking about? Like, if a company says I'm going to be AI ready, but then they don't provide you an API to access the data, which they have, then if they put an AI on their own stuff, how are you going to access their AI, which sits on their data, while also on your data, you have your own AI and they don't have connective tissue? I said, the number one thing you can do when you're thinking about that is ask them, do you have an API so that I can get data from your system into my own system so that I can run my own versions on top? Like, it is not as simple as you thought it might be. So when we think about technology, we think about it from the lens of, is it going to do what I want it to do when it comes to giving my tenants what they want? Is it a functional component? It's not just a content management system or pushing good things. Can I do mobile credentials? Can I provide a great Wi-Fi experience? Can I connect my parking to my access control so we don't have 2 different versions of an app, right? Do I have a system like Yardi or MRI or whatever that's going to fulfill those needs? Do I have a lease abstraction system that I can pull all that together? Those are the basics, right? Think about your technology. What is it going to do for your tenants? How is it going to improve in automation? And then how is it going to be able to retrieve data? Part 2, what is the hospitality components that I'm going to require in order to operate it? Am I going to staff it myself? Probably not, right? So am I going to hire a playbook, or am I going to hire a nanny, or am I going to hire a TS studio, or am I going to hire an Arch Amenities? What does that look like? What do I want them to do, right? How are they going to operate this on my behalf? Do they understand how this technology is going to use? Because they're the main users of it on the ground, right? Can they articulate it really well? And the last thing is, what are the programs that I'm going to put in place that are going to make my buildings responsive to my tenant needs, right? You can have different bag everywhere you go. Like I said, you go to Miami, you're in a building full of pharmaceutical companies, you're going to think about your amenities a bit differently than you're from Boston with a building full of law firms, right? So think about your programs. Am I going to sit here and say, yeah, I'm going to do a co-working offering, right? I'm going to do an amenitized offering. I'm going to run a conference center. I'm going to run an events program, right? Look at your peers. Think about what Tishman Speyer does and say, Tishman has Gather, which is their super amenitized, high-end co-working, high-end conference space, right? Which does all the things that you want. It has food warming and food service inside of it. Do I want to build that type of product? Do I know how to service it? Do I know the technology, right? And so you just think through that lens and say, I have to understand what my operating business plan is going to be. I have to understand what my distinctions are going to be as an asset manager, and I have to find my partners, my technology, and the programs that are going to fulfill that customer experience task. And if I think I can do it, what do I get rewarded by? I get rewarded by retention.
Great way to sum that up. That's the key word for this whole episode, retention. Not just renewal, not just focus on occupancy, but keeping the right customers longer. I think one of the things that data ends up enabling you to do is, while you said earlier, you cannot predict 7 to 10 years in the future in that business plan.
Nobody can. Yeah.
By having the data structured right and understanding it, you can have more confidence in what that business plan is going to look like, which is going to help protect your exit value eventually.
So the exit value is kind of the last thing I wanted to end up with, because this is a co-working conference. I'm sure a lot of co-working folks, right? I used to be a co-working guy. I used to be a WeWork guy back in the day, before in the glory days, right? But I will say this, and I find this really compelling to me today. The number one thing I hear from the office ownership world, even when you have succeeded in building a premium product and showing that, yes, you make enhanced returns versus your peers, in the same way that co-working says, hey, I make enhanced returns versus my traditional deal. Owners in 2026 are challenged because they cannot figure out how to exit. Who is going to buy that enhanced return, right? Where are the giant PE companies and institutionals and foreign capital that we saw in 2010? They're not here in 2026, right? So I've done a great job. I've deployed my business plan. I have great retention. I've driven my rents up. My occupancy is super low. And now they're looking, saying, how do I exit? Who's going to buy this? Who's going to buy it at an 8 cap? Nobody knows, because there's not a lot of value add anymore. You just squeeze the lemon, right? Prior to COVID, we would have seen buyers come in and say, hey, I'll take it. Now we're confused. In the same way that co-working companies go, how do I exit? Like, how do I show that I can take this and I've made all these enhanced returns, and what is the residual value going to be, and who's going to buy it at the end? We're all in the same kind of boat right now. Success and enhanced success is kind of interesting, because we're being forced to hold these things and show cash flow and live with it.
But I think cash flow is the key word there, because if it is generating healthy cash flow, it puts less pressure on the exit. And we're in this funny stage right now where the institutional investors have have left office somewhat.
They'll be back, hopefully.
Of course, but when you go to more operational, non-guaranteed contractual income in a building, and when you've got NOI that's not on 20-year leases, it's healthy cash flow, but it's not predictable until it's stabilized. And so you've got to really look at more family offices, high net worth individuals that are coming in to buy that cash flow. If they're looking on a cash on cash yield.
If you have a deal that's under $25 million, you will have high net worths, ultra high net worths come in and buy those things. If you have a deal size which is in excess of $200, $300 million, there's not enough. Ultra high net worths aren't going to come in here and be like, oh, that sounds great. I'll stroke you a check for 60% of the equity. 50% of the equity at your 8 cap, right? And so we do see deal velocity in the sub 25s. We don't see that much deal velocity on the higher end. And there's some big questions around, like, how are we going to demonstrate that the enhanced value that was created is sticky, it's durable? And I think
this is trading history, right?
Yeah.
It's the data behind the trading history that hasn't really been widely shared by the flex and co-working world widely. It needs to be, so the owners of these buildings can see their exit.
What's the same thing that every one of the co-working companies continues to get asked when asked about how do I finance it? You say, show me 5 years worth of operating history, right? Show me you've been able to do this. These giant towers with these business plans are going to be asked the same thing. Show me 5 years of you operating in this way, right? Show me it's sustainable. Show me it's durable. Show me. And we're just kind of in this place where the world changed a little bit. And now we need to prove it all. And the co-working problem is the same, as insanely as it sounds, as these giant buildings.
Meanwhile, you have these co-working brands that have existed for 10, 20 years that are stable, that are generating great cash, who've seen the worst of times and made it through. So the industry and the business plan is proven. We just need to have it right here in front of us with the data.
It's an interesting time and an interesting place. I think commercial real estate in the next 10 years is going to be super fascinating to watch what happens, but we're already starting to see, like, where it heads. Like, hospitality office, if you do it and you do it, not just like correctly, but you do it, it's the right word I'm looking for here. Authentically is probably the right word. If it's an authentic piece of what you do, and you can feel when it's authentic, right? You can feel when someone has, like, created that buzz and the property managers aren't sitting. I always have a joke about property managers. You can tell the quality of a property manager by the inverse proportion of the butt marks in their office seat, right? And what that means is, like, if they are sitting in that chair in their office all day long and not leaving and not talking to their clients, then they're not doing hospitality office. If your property manager is bouncing around constantly, talking to your PA, talking to the client, dealing with the issues, they're very seldomly in that seat. That's an authentic experience. Like, I can feel it. I can feel the difference when I walk into a building building and I see a sad security guard sitting in front of a gate and there's no music and it's like it doesn't feel authentic. But when you walk into a building and there's someone there to meet you and they're like, hey, can I help you with something? They're not a security guard, they're a greeter now. Like, you can feel that difference. When you walk into a conference room and you go, this doesn't feel good. Like, the AV on the wall looks like it's 10 years old, right? There's a random dongle hanging somewhere and no one can figure out how anything works. Doesn't feel like a good experience. But when you go in there and somebody pops in and goes, hey, can I help you? Can I get you set up? Right? Feels great. All of a sudden you get these, small moments that are really materially different, right? And I think that it's where we're headed into, like, what does a premium product look like? A premium product includes all of that and drives the experience as one of its central focal points and makes people feel, why would I leave? Why would I go anywhere else? This building is doing what I want it to do, right?
Well, clearly everybody in this room at this conference is delivering on exactly what you just described in a positive way. Brandon, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
My
I really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
For those of you listening, wish you were here to see the Q&A afterwards, but thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care of yourself.